Clara had heard nothing but glowing reviews about Mallory Nursery. The establishment was known across town for its pristine reputation, its elegant building, and the promise of top-tier care for babies. It was the kind of place every new mother dreamed of for their child. Still, something about the place made Clara uneasy. There were hushed conversations she overheard in the local market, whispers that didn't quite fit with the polished image of the nursery. Old employees had left, and some of them hinted at dark things lurking within the walls of the pristine establishment. Disappearances, mothers who never returned to pick up their children, babies who vanished without a trace. Clara brushed it off as superstition, stories spun by those who didn't understand the pressure of raising children in a changing world. It wasn't until she arrived at the nursery with her newborn daughter that her anxiety started to swell. The building was just as beautiful as everyone had described it, grand, with large windows letting in the warm sunlight and a perfectly manicured garden that seemed to whisper a false sense of calm. The Mallory sisters greeted her at the door with wide, welcoming smiles that seemed almost too perfect, too practiced. The older sister, Beatrice, had eyes that seemed a little too sharp, as though they saw right through Clara. Evelyn, the younger one, smiled with such charm that Clara almost felt compelled to trust her, despite the twinge of discomfort that tugged at her gut. The nursery was spotless, and the other mothers in the lobby were relaxed, confident, chatting about their lives as they waited. But Clara noticed the tension beneath the surface, the way the mothers never seemed to ask too many questions. No one seemed particularly curious about the strange feeling that lingered in the air. Clara hesitated for only a moment as she handed over her daughter. Beatrice reassured her, her voice smooth like velvet, promising that her daughter would be in the best care possible. There was no turning back now, and Clara left the nursery feeling a mix of relief and unease. For the first few days, everything seemed normal. But as the days passed, Clara's unease deepened. She began hearing subtle rumors, fragments of conversations that seemed deliberately whispered. The women who had dropped off their children before her never came back. She asked a few mothers who had been visiting for years, but their answers were always evasive, averted eyes and tight-lipped smiles. But Clara couldn't shake the feeling that something sinister was at play. It wasn't just the rumors, it was something about the Mallory sisters' manner, something about the strange, unsettling way they spoke when they saw her watching. The final straw came when Clara overheard a conversation between two of the nannies. She had stopped by to check on her daughter unexpectedly, and she caught them speaking in hushed tones, just loud enough for her to hear. "Have you heard about the new one?" one of the nannies asked. The other replied, "She's already gone, swapped again." Clara's heart skipped a beat. Her mind raced with questions. What did swapped mean? Was it possible that babies were being replaced, taken from their mothers without a trace, just like the rumors said? She tried to approach the sisters about it, but their responses were always too smooth, too rehearsed. "Rest assured, dear, everything is under control," Beatrice would say, her eyes glinting in a way that made Clara feel as though she were being watched closely. Clara's suspicions grew by the day. Something was horribly wrong at the Mallory nursery, but she couldn't yet prove it. She began to see things, small signs of something not right, unexplainable fleeting moments when she'd catch a glimpse of something odd in the corner of her eye. The babies, always so quiet when she arrived, didn't seem like typical infants. Their eyes sometimes seemed too old, too knowing, as though they had seen things far beyond their years. At night, Clara would wake in a cold sweat, hearing muffled cries that felt too distant to be real. But when she checked on her daughter, all was silent, as if the nursery itself was playing tricks on her. With each passing day, Clara's certainty grew that something was not as it seemed. Her gut told her the nursery was hiding something. There was too much silence surrounding the mystery of the disappeared babies, too many unanswered questions. And the longer she stayed, the more she realized that the Mallory sisters were more than they appeared. Behind their perfect smiles and graceful demeanor, There was something darker, something they were hiding with their careful charm and controlled lies. Clara knew she had to get to the bottom of it, but she was running out of time. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to come together, but Clara was too afraid to confront the truth directly. She had no evidence, no proof, just a growing sense of dread that gnawed at her from the inside, and yet she couldn't shake the feeling that the nursery was watching her every move. The tension in the air was palpable, as if the walls themselves were holding secrets that no one dared speak. Clara knew now that she had to do whatever it took to uncover the truth, no matter what it might cost her. Beatrice and Evelyn Mallory were the epitome of elegance. The sisters had an almost otherworldly charm, each with a distinct air of authority and grace. Beatrice, the elder, was always impeccably dressed in rich, dark-colored gowns, her movements deliberate and controlled. She managed the nursery with a practiced ease, handling the finances and overseeing the routines of the children. Evelyn, the younger sister, was less often seen. She remained mostly secluded on the upper floors of the nursery, only occasionally appearing to greet mothers with an eerie, practiced smile. Despite their outward perfection, there was something in the way they interacted that made Clara and other mothers uneasy. The excessive warmth in their greetings felt almost forced, a kindness that seemed too rehearsed to be genuine. The sisters' contrasting personalities only added to the mystery. Beatrice was calm, controlled, and always in charge, while Evelyn's silence, combined with her occasional strange gestures, made her an enigma. Clara watched the sisters carefully, noting how they seemed to communicate silently, with brief glances and subtle body language. It was as if there was a hidden understanding between them, something no one else could decipher. As the days passed, Clara began to notice that the other mothers, despite their glowing praise for the nursery, seemed to avoid questioning the sisters or probing deeper into their actions. It was as if they were under a spell, their trust unwavering and unshaken by any suspicions. One afternoon, as Clara arrived early to check on her daughter, she caught a conversation between the two sisters that immediately made her blood run cold. Beatrice was speaking to Evelyn in hushed tones, the words just barely audible through the thick wood of the door. "We must prepare the new ones. They'll be ready soon," Beatrice said. Evelyn, her voice trembling slightly, responded, "Are the identities swapped? Will they be able to start anew?" Beatrice answered with a chilling calmness, "Yes, the process is complete. We'll give them new lives, and no one will ever know." Clara's breath caught in her throat, and her heart raced as she realized that the sisters were talking about more than just their regular duties. The mention of swapping identities and giving new life seemed to hint at something far darker, something sinister. Shaken, Clara backed away quietly, retreating to the hallway and pressing her back against the wall. Her mind raced as she tried to process what she had just overheard. What could the sisters possibly be referring to? Were they replacing the babies? Or worse, were they doing something even more horrific? The idea seemed impossible, but the way Beatrice spoke, so matter-of-factly, made it feel like a twisted reality that was unfolding right before Clara's eyes. She needed answers, but Clara knew that asking the wrong question at the wrong time could put her and her daughter in grave danger. Determined to find out more, Clara began visiting the nursery more frequently, watching the sisters' every move. She noticed that Evelyn was rarely seen during the day, staying locked away in her private quarters. Beatrice, on the other hand, ran the nursery with an air of authority, always present and always managing everything with flawless precision. It was clear that Evelyn was the one who preferred to stay out of sight, but why? Clara's mind wandered to the worst possibilities. Perhaps Evelyn was the one behind the dark secrets, hidden away from prying eyes. Perhaps she was orchestrating the swapping that Beatrice had spoken of. As Clara dug deeper into the nursery's routine, she noticed that, despite the bustling nature of the place, there was a strange calmness that surrounded it. The babies were quiet, too quiet. Clara found it odd that no one ever questioned the absence of cries or the stillness that seemed to hang over the nursery. It was as if the children didn't need to cry. Were they drugged, or were they being conditioned to stay silent, to blend in with their surroundings without drawing attention to themselves? Every time Clara checked on her daughter, she found her in the same condition, calm, unbothered, and eerily content. Clara's suspicions grew with each passing day. The more she watched the sisters, the more it became clear that there was something far more sinister at play. The nursery had been a place of safety for parents, a sanctuary for their children, but Clara could no longer ignore the growing sense of dread in her chest. The atmosphere had changed since her daughter had been dropped off there. The warmth of the building seemed colder now, the silence more oppressive. What had begun as a peaceful haven had slowly become a place of torment, its walls echoing with whispers that only Clara could hear. As the days went on, Clara became obsessed with the Mallory sisters and the mystery they concealed. She spent hours watching the nursery from the street, taking note of every small detail. There were too many unanswered questions, too many moments that didn't make sense. What were the sisters really doing? And why did they seem so intent on keeping the nursery's secrets hidden from everyone else? The whispers, the strange behavior, the unsettling calmness. Everything pointed to something far darker than Clara had ever imagined. Her fear and curiosity were now intertwined, pulling her deeper into the mystery with every passing moment. Clara couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The Mallory sisters' strange behavior had only intensified, and the growing sense of dread gnawed at her every time she left the nursery. She had to know more. Driven by fear and curiosity, she decided to secretly return to the nursery that evening, hoping to find some answers. She had noticed that over the past few weeks, a mother had asked about her child only to be told that her baby had been transferred for better care to another facility. Yet, there were no records, no explanation. The staff's vague and nervous responses only heightened Clara's suspicions. She had to see for herself what was going on behind those walls. That night, Clara waited until the nursery quieted down. She slipped out of her house, her heart pounding in her chest as she made her way to the nursery. The streetlights flickered dimly as she approached the large, grand building. From the outside, everything seemed calm, but Clara knew better now. She moved carefully, staying in the shadows, her eyes scanning every window. As she crept around the back, she noticed a side door slightly ajar. Her pulse quickened as she slipped inside, avoiding detection. The nursery was eerily quiet, too quiet for her comfort. The walls seemed to close in on her as she moved down the corridor toward the back of the building where she had overheard whispers before. When Clara reached the hallway near the back of the nursery, she noticed something odd, a door that had always been locked. The building had several doors, but this one seemed more significant than the others. The very fact that it had been locked during her previous visits made her uneasy. Tonight, however, the door was slightly ajar. She hesitated, listening intently. The faint sound of muffled whispers and the low, unnatural cry of a baby drifted through the cracks in the door. Clara felt a chill run down her spine, her instincts screaming for her to turn back, but she couldn't resist. She needed to know what was behind it. Clara pushed the door open cautiously, the creaking sound echoing through the hallway. The sight inside stopped her cold. It was a large room, dimly lit, filled with dozens of empty cribs. The sight of the cribs, all vacant, sent a wave of horror crashing over her. It was as if the nursery had been abandoned for days. But the most disturbing part was the large table in the center of the room, covered in papers. Clara's heart pounded as she stepped closer, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. The papers were scattered with names, dates, and strange symbols, but it was the names of the babies that caught her eye, names that matched those of the children she had seen before, children who had disappeared. As Clara read the papers, her stomach twisted. The documents detailed the names of several babies, all of whom were supposedly transferred to other facilities, except that Clara recognized that many of these babies were still listed as pending or not claimed. The more she read, the clearer it became. This was no ordinary nursery. The babies weren't disappearing as she had originally thought. They were being replaced, swapped, erased from one family's life and handed over to another. Clara's mind raced with the terrifying realization. The babies weren't dying. They were being traded, identities swapped as if they were mere commodities. This was no innocent nursery. It was a front for something much darker. Her blood ran cold as the reality of the situation sank in. Clara stumbled back from the table, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She had thought she was investigating a simple mystery, but this was a nightmare. The Mallory sisters weren't just running a nursery, they were orchestrating a horrific operation, manipulating families and children. The room felt oppressive, as if the walls themselves were closing in on her, suffocating her with their secrets. She turned to leave, but the sound of a baby crying coming from a distant part of the nursery made her freeze. It wasn't a normal cry, it was unnervingly hollow, as if the baby was not truly alive, but something else entirely. Clara bolted from the room, her mind reeling. She couldn't process everything she had just uncovered. The evidence was clear, but the enormity of the situation overwhelmed her. How could she expose something like this? The Mallory sisters had carefully constructed this operation, covering their tracks and maintaining a perfect facade. How many other babies had been swapped? How many families had been destroyed without even realizing it? As Clara left the nursery, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had barely scratched the surface. Whatever was going on here, it was far more sinister than she could have ever imagined. In the coming days, Clara would begin to piece together the horrifying details of what she had witnessed, but it was already clear the Mallory sisters were not just kidnappers. They were involved in a much darker practice, swapping the identities of babies, creating false families, and erasing lives. The mystery of the nursery was no longer a question of missing babies. It was a question of stolen futures, altered realities, and a twisted conspiracy that would change everything Clara thought she knew about the Mallory sisters, and about the world she lived in. Clara knew she couldn't stay away from the nursery. She had to find more answers, and she needed them now. The tension in her chest was suffocating, but she steeled herself for what she might uncover. Under the cover of darkness, she slipped through the back entrance of the nursery once again. This time, however, she was determined to dig deeper. She couldn't just wander the halls and observe. She needed concrete evidence, something irrefutable that would expose the Mallory sisters for what they were. Her heart raced as she moved cautiously through the corridors, past the rooms where the children slept, their quiet breaths a stark contrast to the chaos building in her mind. Her instincts led her straight to the office she had previously seen Beatrice entering. Clara hesitated before entering, her hand trembling as she turned the knob. Inside, the room was neat, almost too neat, with every file perfectly stacked and every object placed in its exact spot. It was then that she saw it, a thick folder sitting partially hidden on a shelf in the back. The file had no label, no identifying marks, just a faded edge that seemed to beckon her. Clara's heart pounded as she pulled it out, carefully flipping it open. Inside were pages and pages of names, dates and families, listed alongside other names, new names. Each entry was paired with a new identity, a new family for a child that wasn't theirs. Clara's hands shook as she skimmed through the documents, each one revealing a new, horrifying truth. The names on the lists were of children she had seen at the nursery, but alongside their names were new identities, complete with new birth certificates, parents' names and family histories that didn't belong to them. The babies she had once believed were lost had not died. They were alive, re-identified, and given to different families that thought they were receiving their own children. The Mallory sisters weren't just running a nursery. They were swapping the identities of newborns, stealing lives, and replacing them with false ones. Her mind reeled as she pieced together the implications of what she had uncovered. The nursery wasn't a place of care or innocence. It was a hub for a massive operation, one that had been running for years. The Mallory sisters had created a network of swapped identities where children were taken from one family and given to another without anyone ever realizing the truth. There were families out there who had been grieving the loss of their children, unaware that the babies they had loved were living in someone else's home, wearing someone else's name. The sheer scale of the operation was staggering. Clara had unwittingly stepped into a nightmare far deeper than she had ever imagined. The more Clara read, the more she realized how deep the deception went. There were babies swapped between families who had never even met. Infants taken from the most vulnerable and placed with parents who believed them to be their own. The operation wasn't just about kidnapping, it was about altering the very fabric of identity. The Mallory sisters weren't just criminal masterminds. They were playing God with the lives of innocent children, and the most disturbing part was that they had been doing this for years, perhaps even decades. The number of children affected was far beyond what Clara could have anticipated. The entire town was involved, whether they knew it or not. The file also revealed something else, names that Clara hadn't seen before. Some of the babies had been swapped so many times that their original identities were lost in the shuffle. It was as if they had been erased from existence, given new lives that they didn't choose, stripped of their pasts and their families. Clara's stomach churned as she realized that the Mallory sisters were not just taking children for their own benefit, they were erasing entire histories, playing with the very concept of family and identity. Every time a baby was swapped, it created a new web of lies, a web that would be nearly impossible to untangle. Clara's hands clenched into fists as her mind raced. How could she confront the Mallory sisters about this? How could she expose their twisted scheme without putting herself and the babies in even more danger? She knew that the sisters would never let anyone discover the truth. The walls of the nursery were built on lies, and the sisters would do anything to protect their secret. Clara had to think carefully about her next move. If she confronted them directly, she would be walking into a trap. She had to be careful, patient, and strategic. As Clara closed the file, the reality of the situation began to settle in. She couldn't just walk away from this. These children deserved the truth, the chance to know who they truly were. But the cost of exposing the Mallory sisters' operation could be more than Clara was willing to risk. She had already seen what they were capable of, how they manipulated and deceived without hesitation. And now, she realized, the risk of confronting them was greater than ever. The Mallory sisters had no intention of stopping, and if Clara didn't act fast, their operation would continue unchecked. Clara had made up her mind. She couldn't let this go on any longer. But as she stood in the nursery, the silence around her felt like a warning. The walls seemed to close in, the weight of the secrets they held bearing down on her. She had no choice but to expose the truth, no matter the cost. But she also knew that in doing so, she was stepping into the heart of a much darker nightmare than she had ever anticipated. Clara had barely slept for days, her mind racing with the horrors she had uncovered. The quiet whispers in the nursery, the unsettling conversations between the sisters, and the missing babies all led to one dark conclusion. But there was still so much she didn't understand. Desperate for answers, Clara began digging deeper into the history of the Mallory family, hoping to find something, anything, that would explain their disturbing actions. One night, while rummaging through the attic of the nursery, Clara found an old, dusty diary hidden beneath a pile of forgotten boxes. It was leather-bound, worn with age, but the inscription on the cover was still visible, the legacy of the Mallory sisters. With trembling hands, Clara opened the diary. The pages were yellowed and fragile, the ink faded but still legible. The entries were written by the matriarch of the Mallory family, the mother of Beatrice and Evelyn. Clara's heart sank as she began reading the first entry. The matriarch spoke of an ancient family secret, one that had been passed down for generations. According to the diary, the Mallory family had been practicing dark rituals for centuries, rooted in the belief that the swapping of babies' identities could grant the family immortality. Clara's mind spun as she read the details of these rituals, each one more twisted than the last. The sisters were not just running a nursery, they were continuing a centuries-old practice in pursuit of eternal life. The more Clara read, the more horrified she became. The matriarch described how she had performed the first swapping ritual when her own children were babies. The idea was simple, but monstrous. By taking the identities of other children and replacing them with their own, the Mallory family could, in essence, keep their bloodline alive while shedding their physical forms. As the years passed, the rituals became more complex, and the need for fresh victims grew. Clara's stomach turned as she read how the matriarch had convinced her daughters, Beatrice and Evelyn, to take part in the ritual when they were young, promising them unimaginable power and eternal life. Over the decades, the Mallory sisters had taken the family's dark traditions even further. Clara's mind reeled as she learned how the sisters had sacrificed their humanity in exchange for power. The identity swaps were no longer just a means of preserving the family's legacy. They had become a ritual of dominance. The babies they stole were no longer seen as innocents, but as tools for a greater, more terrifying purpose. The sisters were creating an army of children, not to love and nurture, but to serve their macabre interests. The infants were meant to grow, live, and eventually join the Mallory sisters in their twisted quest for immortality. Clara's blood ran cold as she realized the full scope of the Mallory sisters' plan. They weren't just kidnapping babies, they were systematically stealing lives to create an army of beings who could continue their dark work long after they themselves had passed away. The babies weren't meant to live normal lives. They were meant to serve the Mallory family, to become extensions of their power, their servants, and their eternal legacy. The thought of what the sisters had done, and what they were still doing, was more than Clara could bear. She had to stop them, but she had no idea how. Her hands shook as she read the final entries in the diary. The sisters had begun to practice rituals that went beyond just swapping identities. The matriarch had begun using forbidden rites that would allow her to transfer her essence into the bodies of the swapped children, ensuring that she would never truly die. Clara's mind struggled to comprehend what she was reading. These weren't just sick, twisted women. They were a danger to the entire town, to every family that had ever trusted them. The Mallory sisters were trying to conquer death itself, using innocent children as pawns in their perverse game of immortality. Clara felt trapped. She had no idea who to trust anymore. The more she learned, the more her world seemed to crumble. The truth about the Mallory sisters was darker than she had ever imagined, and now she couldn't escape it. Her every step felt like it was leading her deeper into their web of deceit. She didn't know if the people she had once called friends were actually in on the sisters' scheme. Could anyone be trusted, or had the Mallory family already corrupted them all? Clara's paranoia began to take hold as she realized that if she exposed the truth, she would not only be risking her own life, but the lives of everyone she cared about. Clara knew she had to act fast, but with each new piece of the puzzle, her sense of fear and helplessness grew. The Mallory sisters were powerful, and their influence was far-reaching. If she exposed them, she risked not only being killed, but also endangering the very children she sought to protect. Every step she took seemed to lead to more questions, more dangers. How could she stop the Mallory sisters without becoming part of their dark legacy? She had no answers, only the suffocating feeling that the clock was ticking and the danger was closing in. Clara's heart pounded in her chest as she made her way to the nursery, the weight of her discoveries heavy on her shoulders. She knew the confrontation would be dangerous, but she had no choice. The Mallory sisters had to be stopped. Armed with the evidence she had gathered, she entered the nursery with a sense of purpose, determined to finally expose their twisted operation. But when she found Beatrice and Evelyn, they weren't startled by her presence, nor did they try to deny the accusations. Instead, their eyes gleamed with a mixture of amusement and something darker. They had been expecting her. "Clara, we knew you would come," Beatrice said softly, her voice almost a purr. "You've been digging around, haven't you? We always knew you were different, but you've misunderstood what we're trying to do." Evelyn stood beside her, her expression unreadable, but Clara could see the flicker of something sinister behind her cold gaze. "You don't need to fight us. Join us, and you'll finally understand. You'll become part of the family. You can protect your daughter and gain so much more." Clara's blood ran cold as she realized the depth of their manipulation. They weren't just inviting her, they were luring her into their web. The sisters revealed more than Clara could have ever imagined. Their operation was not just about swapping identities, it was something far more sinister. The babies were not only re-identified, they were subjected to supernatural forces, bound by a power that went beyond simple magic. Clara's stomach churned as the sisters explained how they used the ritual to control not only the children, but anyone who dared to challenge them. They had mastered a dark art, one that allowed them to control the lives and fates of those around them, and they were offering Clara the same power. She would be their ally, their equal. All she had to do was accept. "Your daughter will be safe with us," Evelyn said, her voice low and seductive. "We can give you everything. Power, protection, immortality, all of it. But there is a price, of course." Clara felt the walls close in around her as she realized the true cost of joining them. The price wasn't just her soul, it was her humanity. It was a price she wasn't willing to pay. Her daughter's safety was everything to her, but not at the expense of losing herself. She could see the warning signs in the sisters' eyes. There was no escape once you joined them. Clara knew she couldn't give in. Terrified, Clara took a step back, her mind racing. She couldn't accept their offer. She had to get out of there, away from the nursery and the curse that the Mallory sisters had cast over it. But as she turned to leave, Beatrice's voice stopped her. "You think you can just walk away?" she asked, her tone now icy and cold. "You think you can expose us and live to tell the tale? You don't understand, Clara. There's no escaping once you know too much." The door slammed shut with a deafening bang, trapping Clara inside. The sisters' power was undeniable, and now she was their prisoner, caught in their web of dark magic. As the air thickened with tension, Clara realized just how deeply the Mallory sisters had entrenched themselves in the supernatural. This wasn't just a family with twisted desires, it was a family bound by an ancient malevolent force that had been passed down for generations. And now she was a part of their dark legacy, whether she liked it or not. The walls of the nursery seemed to close in around her, and Clara knew that her fight for survival had only just begun. Clara stood frozen in the heart of the nursery, her breath shallow and quick. The walls around her seemed to pulse with an ominous energy as she watched her daughter, now a young woman, standing motionless among the other children. Children whose identities had been swapped, their memories erased. She couldn't recognize the girl before her, yet she knew with a chilling certainty that this was her daughter. The Mallory sisters had done it. They had taken her baby and turned her into one of their own. Her daughter's eyes, once filled with innocence, now reflected the same cold emptiness that Clara had seen in the sisters. The overwhelming sense of loss nearly broke her, but she knew she had to act before it was too late for her. Desperation filled Clara as she moved toward the altar where the documents of identity swapping were kept. She had to destroy them, expose the Mallory sisters for what they were. She couldn't let them have control over any more lives, especially not her daughters. But as she reached for the papers, the sisters appeared before her, their once beautiful faces now contorted with power. They no longer resembled the women Clara had once seen running the nursery. The dark magic they had used had twisted their appearances, making them seem less human and more monstrous. "You cannot undo what has been done," Beatrice hissed, her voice low and cold. "The ritual is a curse, a bond we cannot break without paying the ultimate price. You have no idea what you're up against." Clara's heart raced as the weight of their words sank in. The ritual, the swapping of identities, wasn't just a scheme. It was a curse that bound the Mallory family to this place, to these children. The children, once they had been swapped, were not just lost. They were trapped, bound to serve the sisters for all eternity. The curse was irreversible, and any attempt to break it would bring unimaginable consequences. Clara's entire body trembled with fear and anger as she realized the magnitude of the power the sisters held over her. She thought she had a way out, but there was no escape. Her daughter, her flesh and blood, was gone, replaced by an empty shell of who she once was. In a fit of rage and despair, Clara lunged toward the documents, desperate to rip them apart and burn them. She needed to expose the sisters, to free the children from their twisted grasp. But as her hands grasped the papers, the sisters did something that made her blood run cold. They smiled, but it wasn't a smile of victory. It was something far darker. "You've already joined the cycle, Clara," Evelyn's voice whispered, her eyes gleaming with malice. "You are part of it now. You always have been. We made sure of that." The words hit Clara like a punch to the gut. She stepped back, her mind reeling as she realized what they meant. She had unknowingly been a part of their cycle from the very beginning. The Mallory sisters had orchestrated everything. Clara's daughter wasn't just a victim. She was another piece of their insidious plan. Clara had been part of the family all along. Her presence in the nursery, her investigations, her relentless pursuit of the truth. It was all part of their design. The sisters had manipulated Clara into exposing their operation, leading her down a path that would eventually lead to her own disappearance. The nursery wasn't just a place where children were swapped. It was a place where lives were bound, where identities were lost, and where the cycle would never end. Clara had been marked as another pawn in their game, another soul to add to their twisted legacy. As Clara attempted to run, to escape the trap she had walked into, she felt a chilling coldness envelop her. The air around her seemed to distort, the walls closing in. Her body became weightless as she was pulled into the darkness, vanishing without a trace. Her screams echoed in the nursery's halls, but no one heard them. The Mallory sisters stood watching, their monstrous eyes gleaming with satisfaction. The nursery remained untouched, its sinister operation continuing as always. The mystery of the Mallory sisters lingered, and the nursery became an eternal shadow over the town. Babies continued to vanish, identities continued to be swapped, and the cycle of darkness went on forever.